All right, welcome everyone. We'll give just a couple minutes to let anyone that wants to attend join, and then we'll get started. All right, it looks like the number of attendees is slowing down a bit. I think we can get started. Thank you all so much for being here today. My name is Julia Potter, and I am the current president of Women in Mining Arizona. First, we'd like to say welcome and thank you for joining us for today's talk about the history of women mining in Arizona. Before getting started, we just want to give a brief introduction to our organization and why we're hosting these talks. So the Women in Mining Arizona chapter, or WIM Arizona as we often call it, is a nonprofit organization with several objectives, one of which is to educate our members and the public on the technical, economic, regulatory, and other mining related topics. To meet this commitment, we host these monthly dig-in talks. So thanks so much for being here today. And we also want to thank our sponsors. A big thank you to Freeport-McMoRan. They are the WIM Arizona 2020-2021 Platinum sponsor, and we are able to put on these talks thanks to them. I'm going to turn it over to Mario, who's going to introduce our sponsors today.
Hi, everyone. All right, so we have some great speakers today. Avi Buckles has been an archaeologist in the private sector since 2000, when he started working on cultural resource management projects throughout Arizona and New Mexico. He currently serves as Director of Cultural Resources at Westland Resources, Inc. in Tucson. For more than a decade, Avi conducted field projects for Westland with a research focus on historical archaeology and Southwestern mining and ranching history. His passion remains mining history, and Avi has produced detailed mining landscape studies and multimedia public presentations that integrate field archaeology, archival research, and oral history to help manage proposed and legacy mining operations. And also joining us today, we have Stephanie Brown. Stephanie is a Philadelphia local that came to Arizona in 2012 to pursue a career in archaeology. She has been a member of Westland Resources Cultural Resources team since 2015 with an emphasis on Southwestern archaeology, historical archaeology, and archival research, oral histories, and historical artifact analysis. Stephanie has completed a number of studies focused on historical mines, mining camps, ranches, and cemeteries throughout Arizona, New Mexico, and California. I'd like to welcome both of you, Avi and Stephanie, and now I'll turn it over to you so that you can start your presentation.
Thank you very much, Mario, and welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to this presentation where we're going to talk about some really neat stories from Arizona mining history. So it was about 15 years ago that I decided I was sick of fighting with the prehistoric archaeologists, and I really started to get into mining history. I've done projects all over Arizona and New Mexico, from the original Placer Gold District near Santa Fe, of course, down to Morenci, one of the biggest copper mines in the world. So when I was doing a lot of this research, I started noticing in the old archival records about these very strong, independent women prospectors, mine owners, and engineers. And I'm not just talking about, 1950s plus, I'm talking about heading way back into the 1800s. And, a lot of these stories really interested me. I saw them, and it was some years ago that Hud Bay, Rick Grinnell of Southern Arizona Business Coalition, as well as Freeport and BHP in more recent years have really helped fund some of this research on women miners. And really, these folks set the stage for today and all the women in mining today. So without further ado, I'm going to have Stephanie give you guys a nice show about historic women mining in Arizona. Thank you.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great. Thanks, Avi. So before I begin, I'd like to give a shout out again to Freeport. For this presentation today, not all of the photographs, but quite a few of the photographs in this presentation are from another project that Westland did with Freeport, Freeport Morenci. And in this project, we interviewed a local mining historian by the name of Don Lunn about a large collection of historical photographs that he had in his possession, along with FMI's private collection and the Greenlee County Historical Society's collection. So these photographs and interviews were organized into a large research database. And it's just a really useful database that we created for doing any kind of historical research about mining. So if that's something, or if the database or anybody wants to know anything extra about some of these photographs, please feel free to ask at the end. Love talking about the database. So for this presentation, I'm going to mostly talk about an overview of women in the frontier and Arizona as miners, and talk about some of the well-known women, as well as some more recent research into previously unknown women miners. So in general, women are known to have been present in various mining camps throughout the Western frontier and in Arizona. And women in mining camps were primarily seen as more of a civilizing force for the camp. So camps with women were considered to be more civilized, less violent than some of the rugged frontier shanties that sprang up around the mines. Camps with women tended to be more family oriented and less dangerous than otherwise. So women in mining camps often found waged and non-waged work in the hospitals, homes, schools, and businesses that accompanied mining camps in boom towns. So some of the most common occupations were women often found work in the homes and in the community hospitals. Many of the teachers in the West were women. So women found occupations within childcare and education in boom towns. And of course, women found positions in the service industry, working at the local company stores, various grocers, restaurants, hotels, and boarding houses in the West. Less frequently, but available in some of the larger mining towns and at some of the larger mines, women were able to find work in the mine offices doing secretarial positions or whatever kind of odds and ends were needed. Women were often not able to find work in any kind of industrial occupation at the mine. So women were not often hired at the smelters, the mills, and definitely were excluded from underground work. And part of the reason for that were rampant superstitions. So given the dangerous, dark, and often eerie conditions in underground mines, it's no surprise that a lot of superstitions were tied to underground mining. Those ranged from anything from black cats to whistling in the mine, don't work on Good Friday, don't bring your dog, don't kill spiders. If you feel a warm breeze, it could be a malevolent spirit, and don't walk under ladders, but don't also allow women underground. Women underground were seen as extremely bad luck that could cause destruction and accidents within the mine. And a lot of these superstitions are culturally derived from English, Scottish, and Welsh immigrants. who came to the United States to work in the mines. And these superstitions, along with kind of views of women as the fairer sex, being weaker or less competent than men, led to legislation that actually kept women legally from working in the mines. So in 1915, the Bureau of Mines passed legislation prohibiting the employment of women in any mine as a misdemeanor offense punishable under the law. Under sections 38 and 131 that I have here for you of the rules and regulations for metal mines, women and children under 16 were not permitted to work underground, but they were legally permitted to work in the office buildings at the surface. So similar legislation was already in place in England since the 1840s. So just going back to those English immigrants, bringing these views with them into the Americas. So despite all of this superstition and the legal issues and challenges before them, women still pursued ventures in prospecting, business, and mine ownership in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Women prospectors were known to have been present in California as early as 1849. The boom in Arizona came a few decades later, and as the need for miners in the West grew throughout the late 19th century, an increasing number of women prospectors were active in the West. In particular, women were working in Nevada, the Yukon, and Arizona. It's said that around 100 women prospectors are known to have been operating in the Western American frontier lands during this time period. But historians estimate that there could have been 3 times the number owing to gaps in the documentary records. So aside from just the general lack of records, another difficulty in researching women in mining is that oftentimes their names are left out. So sometimes the woman's name is just not listed at all, or they are only listed under their husband's name, which makes some research really difficult if the place that you're researching was really ephemeral, short-lived. It's hard to track down people based on, Mrs. So-and-so. So one example is in 1886, the first known woman prospector in Arizona was recorded only as Mrs. Holly. And she's known to have located the San Juan copper property near Safford, where the Freeport-McMoRan open pit mine is located today. The same copper claim was later acquired by another woman who was only recorded as Mrs. H.L. Holborn. So it shows that, a lot of times it just misses so-and-so and they're really hard to track. So some other notable women in this time include Jenny Hilton in 1896. She owned a valuable mine near the Harquahala Mountains, which she sold for $35,000, which was a sum comparable to $1 million by today's standards. So she didn't do too half bad. Miss Hilton had formerly been employed as a school teacher, but found herself drawn to adventure in Arizona and New Mexico, and obviously preferred prospecting. So another unnamed woman in Tombstone was said to have sold a mine in 1904 for $25,000. Women were able to make large profits, or at least earn larger sums of money than they were doing any other waged work opportunities that were available to them during this time period. So let's talk about some of the famous women in Arizona mining. We have Miss Lillian Malcolm, formerly an actress in New York City. Lillian purchased stock in Western Mining Ventures and ended up losing her money. She found herself drawn to the West to try prospecting firsthand, figuring that as a prospector, she would do better than she did as a stockholder. So in 1898, she left to go prospect for gold in the Yukon and worked her way south during the following decades, prospecting in Nevada, Arizona, and Mexico. Lillian states that at the start of her journey, she found herself being at a disadvantage. And so she began to study geology and mineralogy during her travels. Lillian acquired a number of interests in properties throughout the Southwest and stated that one of the most satisfying aspects of prospecting was the pleasure of being alone in solitude, working as her own boss, and reaping all the rewards of her own labor. One account she gives of prospecting in the Funeral Mountain Range in Death Valley, she says that the heat, rugged terrain, and desolate landscape would often cause the men she was traveling with to turn back. People often, she said, tended to go a little crazy out there in Death Valley. So she would continue on with her pack animals by herself, and she ended up developing a unique way to scale the steep terrain. Lillian would grab onto the tail of one of her donkeys and scream really, really shrill in order to startle it and send it running up the mountain pass while she clung to the tail for the added momentum. Nellie Cashman is another famous Arizona woman miner. She was known as a mining angel, or the Angel of Tombstone. And she was known for this for her fundraising and charitable work that she did within the mining camps to raise money for the construction of churches. She also constructed schools and hospitals. Nellie was born in Ireland in 1845 and came to the United States with her mother and siblings in 1850. Following the Irish potato famine, Nellie was known to have a good feeling for the booms and busts, and was known to open various businesses, including boarding houses and grocery stores in the West. Among her boarding house businesses, Nellie also conducted small prospecting forays and dealt in mining claims. She's known to have prospected in Arizona, California, Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming in the 1880s and 1890s, and eventually left seeking gold in Alaska in the early 1900s, where she resided until her death in 1925. Clara Fish Roberts was the first student to register at the University of Arizona in 1891 when the school first opened. Although she had completed her coursework by 1896 at the university made Clara wait until 1897 when they had a large enough graduating class. At the time, the university only offered 2 degrees, one in mining and one in agriculture. Clara chose to complete the degree in mining, but went on to teach afterwards and was always interested in primarily in the sciences. It's estimated that between 1900 and 1945, less than 20 women were enrolled in the University of Arizona mining and engineering programs, and even fewer graduated with actual degrees. So moving on to some recent research. We recently did a project with BHP out at the Old Dominion mine in Globe. And I was fortunate enough to get to go look at some of the remains of the old buildings and mining features out there. And I've been working on and off on some archival research for the project as well. So this research is still ongoing, but I wanted to share it with you today because I ended up finding 3 previously unknown female mine owners who operated in Globe during the early 1900s. So the 3 mine owners are Carolina Woods, Cornelia Anderson, and Elizabeth House. I found these 3 women by looking at the mineral survey plats for the area. So these were patented mining claims that these women patented themselves under their own names. And that's how I was able to end up tracking them down. So Carolina Woods, or Carrie Woods, and her husband Lyman were longtime residents of Globe. Lyman operated a saloon in the town of Globe, and Carolina is known to have patented the Copper Queen mineral claim, visible at the top there, in the Globe mining district in 1906. At the time, the property was a small-time mine with 3 shafts, valued at around $550. Carolina, along with her husband and several other partners, incorporated the Montezuma Copper Mining Company, where she acted as secretary. Her foray into mining was short-lived, however, and the Montezuma Mining Company was sold after only 2 years of being in business. In 1885, Cornelia Anderson officially declared herself as a sole trader, and this gave her the ability to carry on official business in money loans and real estate in her own name. Cornelia owned a number of properties in Globe, including mining properties, commercial and residential buildings. She was the landlord of the previously mentioned Lyman Woods Saloon, and Cornelia also owned mining property in Rye, Arizona. She is known to have patented the Future Copper and Last Chance mineral lode claims in the Globe District in 1899, and those are visible in the center there. At this time, the claims were developed by 5 shafts and 3 tunnels comprising over 100 feet of work and valued at over $3,000. She held the deeds to various unpatented mineral claims in the Globe District as well. She was described by period newspapers as one of the richest citizens in Globe and owning many valuable properties worth thousands of dollars. Unfortunately for Cornelia, her mental health deteriorated when she was buying up all of these properties. She was already in her 70s. So by the time she was in her 80s, with her advanced age, she ended up falling prey to a dishonest legal guardian who neglected all of her properties and left her destitute and homeless when she was in her 80s. And then we have Elizabeth House, better known as Lizzie House. She settled with her family in Globe in 1884 after leaving their home of Tyrone, Ireland. Lizzie married Winthrop House, a miner working in Globe. She was active in mining since at least 1899, when she was recorded as a co-owner of several unpatented mining claims in the Globe Mining District. She and her husband were also principal stockholders at the Iron Cap Mining Company. Lizzie patented the Bowery Girl mining claim solely in her name, and also patented an additional 5 mineral claims with a partner, William Stevenson. The Bowery Girl was patented by Lizzie in 1906, at which time the property was developed by 4 shafts and 2 open cuts and valued around $1,000. So moving into the World War II era, the World War II draft was active between 1940 and 1946. During this time, more than 10 million men were called for military service. This made finding employable men extremely difficult in many industrial workplaces in the United States. And many industries opened their doors to hiring women for the very first time. And many Arizona women were also able to find work in the mills and smelters for the first time. Women were still mostly excluded from underground and pit operations, with older and disabled men predominantly taking those job opportunities. However, work in the mills and smelters provided a financial security and independence that many women had not previously known. So this was a huge turning point for women working in industry and working in mining. So let's talk about some World War II era women. Blanche Elise Lightower was the next woman to graduate from the University of Arizona School of Mines in 1944. While she was at the University of Arizona, she also got her pilot's license and was a member of a sorority. After graduation, she worked as a mineralogist, metallurgist, and geologist for the university and with the Arizona Bureau of Mines. She married Robert Peckham in a small informal ceremony in 1946. And the University of Arizona alumni newspaper kind of notes that she decided to wear a white pantsuit instead of a dress, which I guess was scandalous for the time. The couple dabbled in various business ventures, and Blanche became successful in real estate. Later in life, she was also passionate about working with nonprofit and charitable organizations to improve mental health care for underserved communities. So some recent research that Westland's done has also found a previously unknown woman mine owner in the Helvetia area in the 1940s. So we've been working with HUD Bay since the early 2010s, doing archaeological research and historical research in the Helvetia area. So this research came from some of the 2017-2018 archival research that I got to do. So the Leader Mine was a notable copper property in the Helvetia Mining District. It's the only location in the Santa Rita Mountains where molybdenite, a molybdenum ore, and powellite, a tungsten ore, had been discovered. It was worked during the first decade of the 1900s during the first Helvetia boom, and was reopened again during World War II by the district's only known female mine owner, Ruth Blankenship. Ruth and her husband Lon owned a successful car dealership business in Tucson. But in July of 1933, while Ruth was on vacation with her family in San Diego, Lon drove one of his cars to Nogales with the intention of making a sale. When the other party did not show, Lon began driving back to Tucson. On his way back to town, he saw what appeared to be a young military serviceman walking the road towards Tucson. Lon offered the young man a ride, figuring that he would need some help. The young man was actually an 18-year-old drifter and murder suspect who had escaped a boys' home in New York State and had just stolen part of a military uniform, as well as a gun from the armory in Nogales. After accepting the ride, the young man asked Lon to pull over and then held him at gunpoint for his watch and cash. When Lon refused, the young man shot him, removed him from the vehicle, and drove away, only to crash the car several miles up the road. The police later found him in possession of his watch and cash at the hotel in Tucson. After this tragedy, Ruth returned to Tucson and continued to run the family car dealership by herself. She purchased the Leader mine sometime prior to World War II. And while she did not have any mining experience, she definitely was an accomplished businesswoman in her own right. She hired a manager, Robert Burney, who was an experienced miner and miller who had previously worked for the Helvetia Mining and Milling Company and who had grown up in the Helvetia district. Under the leadership of Blankenship and Burney, the mine employed 36 men in August of 1942. They installed a 75-ton capacity Mark City ball mill at the mine. And while the total production for the World War II period isn't known, it's known that in 1941, the mine produced 1,260 tons of ore, consisting of 12 ounces of gold, 1,500 ounces of silver, and 105,000 pounds of copper, for an approximate revenue of $13,000. Unfortunately for the duo, Robert Burney was drafted in 1943, and Ruth began to consider offers to sell the mine. This letter here is from C.M. Taylor, a county assessor in 1943, to J.S. Kupel, the director of mines, the director of the Department of Mines and Mineral Resources. And it highlights some of the difficulties that Ruth must have faced owning the Leader mine as a woman. So Taylor was interested in purchasing the mine, and he had requested a really long 60-day purchasing option to examine the property. When Ruth replied that she had too many interested parties wanting to examine the property to allow for such a long examination period, Taylor wrote a letter to Kupel complaining of how unreasonable she was on account of her sex, stating, being a woman, it is impossible to argue with her or get her to listen to anything that is within reason. So this letter demonstrates some of those difficulties that Ruth must have faced just because she was a woman instead of being a man in the business. Despite that, and despite letters like this, she continued operating the mine until the end of World War II in 1945, after which time the operations at the Leader mine ceased. But Ruth held on to the property until 1961, when she sold it to the Banner Mining Company. And after her career as a mine owner and manager, Ruth went on to become the first woman to hold office in the Tucson City Council in 1946. And she also ran for state legislature in 1954, although she did not win that particular election. So moving into the post-war era, this era saw a return to more strict gendered segregation in the workplace. And as men returned from war, women were expected to leave their positions and return to life at home. Some companies were, of course, more lenient than others. And in some places, provisions were made where widows or family members of disabled veterans could keep working. In Morenci at Phelps Dodge in particular, many of the women wanted to continue working, and the company allowed them to stay on at the mills following the return of the men from the war. In 1972, the Equal Opportunity Act was passed, giving women workers the right to employment without discrimination based on race, color, religion, gender, or national origin. The passing of this legislation empowered more women to apply for industrial work and work within the mines. In many instances, of course, the new female employees were met with resistance and harassment and assault, both inside and outside of the workplace, in an effort to scare some of the new workers off. So in the 1980s and the 1990s, class action lawsuits were actually begun as women sued their employers for the discriminatory behavior that they faced from coworkers and management. One of these stories actually made it all the way into popular culture. One large and notable case that took place in Minnesota was the case brought about by Lois Jensen against Evelyn Mines. Lois was harassed inside and outside of the workplace and even resulted in having her home broken into at one point. So her experience and case became really well known and is the basis for the movie North Country that came out in 2005. Other instances that are available publicly, the University of Arizona has also participated in recording the experience of miners in Arizona for an oral history archive that's available online. Here you can find the experience of Sally Balfour, the first female ore truck driver in the Morenci mine. Her experience wasn't quite as extreme as Lois Jensen's, but she does talk about some of the harassment and some of the things that made her uncomfortable during her time working there. So some photographs from the post-war era. Here we have men and one woman who's pictured on the lower left side here, working at the flotation floor at the Phelps Dodge Corporation concentrator and plant site, Morenci. And here we have the photograph of the portrait of the concentrator workers following World War II. You can see all of the women are lined up in the center row there. So today, in the 19th and 20th centuries, up to World War II, women were mostly relegated to surface and support work. The vast majority of women miners were not employed underground. Instead, they prospected, ran businesses, did surface work in the associated offices and mills, and acted as owners and stockholders in various mining ventures. Women in the past persevered through superstition and legislated misogyny. And today, the number of women employed in mining is growing, and the positions that women hold in mining are also becoming more diverse. So in 2019, the US Bureau of Labor Statistics estimated that women made up about 15.8% of the workforce in mining and related industries, which was up from only 13% in 2013, and up even further from 6% around 1970. One article from the Colorado School of Mines looked at stock data and found that the stocks of companies with women board members tended to outperform all male boards by 17 to 26% on an average over a 6-year period. The study also found that companies with similar facilities and equipment with women board members tended to use less water and natural resources than all male boards. These mixed gender boards also tended to invest more in cultural stewardship and community engagement. And overall, these mixed board companies led to better ratings for environmental and cultural stewardship than their all-male counterparts. In addition to this, the study also found that companies with women board members tended to have better safety records than all-male board-led companies. In the past, women were attracted to mining work for the stable benefits, pay, and possibility of independence and adventure. These reasons continue to attract women to the field today. Interviews of women who have worked or work in the industry list the reasons for their interest as financial stability, independence, family heritage, and the possibility for travel, global work, and adventure. There are always, of course, a number of areas for improvement for women mining. PPE, harnesses, equipment are often made with the average size man in mind. So this poses a potential hazard for women using ill-fitting PPE and equipment. Another area of improvement is education. Even with the positive momentum since the 1970s to the present, women still only make up just under 16% of the industry. and women are overall less likely to pursue degrees in mining and engineering fields and are more likely to drop out from these programs. So this makes opportunities for education and mentoring a top priority for continued positive growth within the field. With so much room for improvement, it's important to continue to talk about the history and where it all started and where we're going. So I'm really excited to be able to talk to you about that today.
Thank you, Steph. That was great. So I see the same reasons given for women wanting to go into mining back in the day, and currently I saw adventure in both of them. I think there were some other consistencies in there.
Yes, adventure, the money.
You know, it always amazes me whenever I do these historical studies that you know, people don't change. Same urges and all that good stuff, what people want. So let's see, do we have any questions from folks? You can enter it down in the Q&A or in the chat. Okay, so it looks like Seth Gehring asked, you know, can you talk a little bit more about the database mentioned, what is included, and is it accessible online for general access? I can go ahead and take that one. So, you know, this was part of a large effort by Freeport-McMoRan and the Morenci mine to, you know, really capture the stories of this older gentleman named Don Lunt and his wife, Joe Lunt. Don Lunt has passed on from us, but we were able to get over 1,700 interviews, descriptions of photographs, really amazing stuff. So that is going to be available soon at the Greenlee County Historical Society, as well as the Arizona Historical Society here in Tucson. So a nice little note from Rick Grinnell there, and Rick and Kathy Arnold were the big impetus behind us first starting to study historical women miners in Arizona some years ago. So thank you, Rick, and thank you, Kathy.
Someone did have asked if that you could remind us the date of the letter.
Oh, the letter was from 1943.
Yeah, and actually a lot of the these kind of historical letters and other things that Stephanie found, those are all online on the Arizona Geological Survey, their historical mine data website. So definitely big shout out to Mike Conway and all the other folks that have supported that project over the years to get our mining history on online.
Yeah, there's a lot of great resources online. If you're interested, there's always the Arizona Memory Project. Head over there and just put in some keywords and see if you get any hits. And there's actually a lot of really great photographs and primary source documents that are all archived online.
Definitely, and if any folks on this call come across, you know, old records, maybe if you're working at a mine or you come across something and you have a new historical woman miner, please feel free to email Stephanie and I.
Yeah, I feel like it's something that's not totally explored, and there's a lot of things to still learn and a lot of people to still find, and to go further down these rabbit holes and getting their real names and not just Mrs. So-and-so or what have you, and really following their stories as much as you can. And I think that's part of the most fun part about studying women in mining and their history.
Yeah, absolutely. And looks like folks are asking this copy would be available for use for the National Mine Safety and Health Academy Library. Absolutely. Reach out to me. And then looks like Jenny Nichols has a question for you, Stephanie. Did you find that women moved around from mine to mine or stayed in one location?
For the new research or the recent research portions, I didn't see any of that just yet. They were mostly just purchasing properties around whatever area that they were living in, that they had the opportunity to go out and do with a little bit more ease. But then of course there are people like Lillian Malcolm and Nellie Cashman who traveled all over the Western frontier prospecting and purchasing mineral claims all over the place and dealing in claims and leading trips and getting really involved. So I think it's a whole scale. There are some people who worked at the local level, and then there's people who just went all over the Western territories.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Takes all types, right? And then looks like Chris Ernest. Hey, Chris, had a quick question about early labor laws that banned women and children from working underground. Were there any women involved in early mine labor movements in Arizona? Very good question.
I know that women would often take the places of their husbands and stuff for some of the labor marches. And I can't remember exactly, but women would come to support, either to support the men who were marching, or they would kind of come and set up because, if the Arizona Guard rolls out, do they want to be caught beating up the women, or so if they were worried about violence, sometimes the women would step in to try to mitigate and like diffuse the situation. And there's stories about that happening out there. But they would also, of course, bring them food or water and everything out at the picket lines.
Very interesting. I didn't know that. So looks like Jennifer Berg is asking, were most of these women living in Arizona already, or did they come from all over the U.S.?
Most of them came from, I think, out like the East. In general, during that time period, a lot of people were coming from the East and moving west to take advantage of these new open territories that weren't really open to people until sometimes even until the 1880s, because things were so violent or unpredictable. You could just go missing out in the frontier. And there was all of the Apache wars, and it was really hard to maintain any permanent presence with all of that going on. So it wasn't until some of those Apache wars and things like that settled down that you had people actually permanently settling in these more peripheral areas away from Tucson and the major population areas.
Yeah, it's just kind of like the men that would come out here, out to Arizona to mine. You'd be amazed at the places folks come from, everywhere out east, places like Finland, Bulgaria, really all over the world, Japan, China, South America. So, folks were just good.
It was a new market
Yeah.
at that time. So it was people from all over the United States and from Europe and Asia that were coming.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe folks have heard some talks I've given before, but remember the name Arizona actually comes from the name of a Spanish era mine, Arizonac. This is the copper state. People, ever since it was created in the 1850s, 1860s, people have always associated Arizona with mineral wealth. So it looks like Nancy's asking, do you have any information on women from Hermosillo or Mexico that were involved in the mining sector? It looks like Nancy is business development manager for Mexico. That is a very good question. Stephanie?
I don't have anything in particular, but I know the woman who sold the mine in Tombstone, who wasn't named. She was listed as of Mexican or Hispanic origin. I think that would be a really interesting research project for the future. Lily and Malcolm went down to Mexico and prospected there as well. So there was movement in between Arizona and Mexico for these women. So it'd be interesting to see what happened in Mexico, because I'm not entirely familiar. But that'd be good for future research.
I was going to say there are quite a few Spanish language newspapers, down here in southern Arizona, and we do have some Spanish speakers at Westland, but I've not extensively covered those. But I bet we start looking up words like minero or different combinations is how we'll find that. Really good question.
Looks like we got one more question from Isabel, and then after that we'll roll the.
Sounds good.
Her question was, what do you think would be the next step to keep empowered women in mining?
I think continuing empowering education. Like I suggested at the end, just providing mentoring opportunities to bring women in, and to keep mentoring in the universities as well as on the mine sites as well.
All right, well, with that last question, we are going to wrap up the presentation. We want to give a huge thank you to Stephanie and Avi for presenting today, and also for our sponsors for making this possible. We are active on social media and ask that you follow us on there for updated information. The group website is also updated on a regular basis with information that may be interesting to everybody. I would also like to invite you to join us for our future events. If we go to the next slide. Oh, there it is. Our next dig-in presentation include optimizing high-resolution drone photogrammetry for geotechnical analysis and mining reclamation in Bisbee, Arizona. So those are our next two presentations that we will have. And we also want to invite you for our next quarterly event, which will be next Wednesday, and will include a presentation by Rebecca Darling on highlighting social performance. Make sure to register in advance to attend the event. And we will also be, you can find all the links in the chat as well. But with that, thank you so much for everybody for joining, and we want to wish you a happy rest of your day.